And we're back. Hey everybody, today is going to be the second of a series of videos that we're doing spotlighting some affordable food options that you can buy, especially when on a budget, to build and have some emergency food storage around in your home. The first video that we did was about TVP. This video today is going to be about basic oats. And while everybody's familiar with them and maybe just think about a boring old bowl of oatmeal to eat, there's a lot we can do with oats, and there's a lot of reasons that you should strongly consider these as part of your emergency plan. The affordability, the nutritional value, and the ability for long-term storage makes oats a great option for you when building an emergency food storage plan, especially when on a budget. Today I'm going to show you how to grind up oats and make your own oat flour and make a loaf of bread. That could come in real handy in a grid down or emergency situation where we can't just run to the store and buy a loaf of bread when we want. Let's get started. Oats are a grain that after harvesting and being dehusked, you're left with a kernel type shaped grain roughly. Steel cut oats are when that kernel is chopped up by steel blades and you're left with a little bit more rough bits and pieces like you see pictured here. And the old-fashioned oats that most of us are familiar with are steamed. The kernel of oat is steamed and rolled flat, which gives you the benefit of faster cooking time. When you're buying oats, however, the game changes quite a bit on the way that you're purchasing them. These boxes of instant oatmeal that most of us are familiar with aren't the best option for an emergency food storage plan. You get a relatively low amount of food for the cost of these things. I think this box is around $5 or $6 now. The better option would be to buy this cardboard tube that we're used to seeing that has about 2 pounds of oats in it for around $3 and change, depending on where you're shopping. And this 25-pound bag of rolled oats is really what we're talking about in the video today. Building a usable quantity of emergency food storage that won't break the bank. This 25-pound sack of oats cost me about $16 and change, and really is the best way to purchase this stuff if you're trying to build an emergency response plan. You can get them in bigger quantities than this as well online, I know. And this is something that you'll want to consider to add to your emergency food storage for the many uses of oats that we're going to talk about today. Another one of the great qualities that oats have for emergency food storage plans is being a relatively dry grain. They lend themselves very successfully towards repackaging for long-term storage and bulk quantity storage in your home. You can use food-grade 5-gallon buckets with gamma lids for something that you want to access on a routine basis, or you can also repackage in 5-gallon buckets with Mylar bags and oxygen absorbers, and that'll give you something for long-term food storage. We're going to cover long-term food storage repackaging in a later video. However, oats are definitely one of the perfect foods for this type of storage plan and are one of the reasons that we're spotlighting them today as a great asset to your emergency food storage that won't break the bank. Now let's talk about some of the nutritional benefits to oats. This 1 cup serving of raw oats contains about 300 calories plus or minus and about 8 grams of fiber. Additionally, and more important to me, is that same cup of oats has about 11 grams of protein and 5 grams of fat. Now think about that when you're trying to decide what types of foods to store for emergency food storage. We always think about white rice, we think about pinto beans and that kind of thing, and those are very good options and things that we should have. But anytime you can store a product like this and get that kind of protein content as well as some healthy fat out of it, I think you have an invaluable food source in a grid down or emergency type situations. We're getting 11 grams of protein and 5 grams of healthy fat in a product that for relatively low cost that stores well for a long period of time. All of this adds up to oats being a very important consideration in any emergency food storage plan. All right, let's move on to making our oat flour. We like to do plan, prepare, and practice at the Readiness channel, so rather than just talk about what we're going to do, we're actually going to practice making a couple of recipes out of our oats today and show you just different things that you can do. Certainly not an all-inclusive list, but this is something that was pretty enlightening to me. We have a gluten-sensitive person in our family, so storing flour is kind of tough. The jar that you see back there is a gluten-free type flour, and it's very expensive. It's not something that I'm going to store in any kind of quantity, and really most flours can't be stored for that long anyway. I'm going to put 2.5 cups of our oats in the blender. You can use a food processor too, is my understanding, but I'm going to do it this way. And we're just going to simply grind this up until we have a flour type consistency. If you have earbuds on or have your device turned up real loud, this could get a little noisy on you. So here we go. Okay, after we've ground this up a little bit in your blender or food processor, you're left with a pretty fine flour. And it turns into this pretty quickly in these types of machines. So that fast you've been able to take a couple of cups of your oat, and now we have an oat flour that can be used for all kinds of baking. You can use oats, of course, to extend meats, meatloafs, all those kinds of ideas that most people are aware of. But right now we're going to take this and we're going to make a loaf of bread. The recipe I'm following, I just pulled offline. There are a lot of them on there. I just picked, one of the first ones that I saw. So, there's a lot of variations to this. Pick one that you like. The recipe that I'm following says to add a cup of oats after we've got our flour, and just pulse real quick to kind of chop those up roughly. Okay, in my bowl I've got 3/4 cup of applesauce and 2 large eggs, and I'm just going to go ahead and pour our flour mixture in there now. I've got 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, and a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. We'll throw that in there. They're telling us to add about 3/4 cup of milk to this mixture. And additionally, we've got about 1/4 or so cup of olive oil and some honey that we've added to that. Okay, now we'll start whisking this up. Okay, now I've got an 8 by 4 inch bread pan that I've sprayed some oil into to keep it from sticking. You'll notice that this comes out more like a cake batter than it does a bread dough. So you have to recognize that making oat bread is not quite the same as making a regular bread. One thing that can't be argued is the simplicity of this recipe. We took some simple oats, ground them up into a flour in our blender, threw them in a bowl, whisked them up with some simple ingredients, put it into a greased bread pan. And I'm just going to take some raw oats and sprinkle it on the top for looks more than anything. And now we're going to pop this into a 350-degree oven for about 55 minutes. Okay, we're about halfway through our cooking time now with our bread. I'm just going to give it a quick look. Everything looks like it's coming along pretty well. I'm going to go ahead and cover it with a piece of foil at this point, just lightly tin it so that it doesn't get too burned on the top as we continue cooking. We're going to make a simple homemade granola here. I've got about 4 cups of oats laid out in the pan. To that I've got about 1/8 cup of olive oil. I'm going to finish that up to about 1/2 cup with some coconut oil. And we'll just pour that right over our oats here. To that I like to add about 1/4 cup of honey. And these are, if you'll notice, ingredients that most people have, or you should strongly think about adding to your emergency food storage if you don't have them. Honey keeps pretty much indefinitely under the right storage conditions. Just pour that on there. I like to add the honey after the oil because it allows it to slide out of my measuring cup here without too much problem, and just makes your cleanup a little bit easier. I've got some coconut flakes. You just add a couple of pinches of that. If you like a little bit of brown sugar, you can add that. It's not necessary, but just for a little sweetness in there. And I like to take any type of nuts that we have around the house. These are some pistachios. They're in season right now in our area, so they're pretty abundant. Use whatever you have, pecans or walnuts, that type of thing. We're going to pop it in the oven, let it toast up for about 20 minutes till it's just a light brown. And there's our finished products. If you watched our homemade blackberry jam video that we did, I can tell you that I'm looking forward to a PBJ with some homemade blackberry jam on that bread, and the granola snack that you can make. These are just a few ideas of things that you can make out of oats that are off the beaten path of just the plain old bowl of oatmeal. A lot of emergency foods right now are going through the roof in costs, and availability is getting tough on some of it. So we're going to continue to do some of these videos covering the topics of these foods that we believe are good options for you to build an emergency storage plan out of that won't break the bank. And remember, as always, get ready so that you and your family can succeed and thrive. To our food, where it's an invaluable asset to our food.